distinguished audience and friends, as I shared with you yesterday, we have it's just an inappropriate way of expressing battery of, distinguished personalities amongst us, beginning from, if I begin from my left, Dr. Alka Pande, Rubina Karore, Anju Dodiya, Bhavna Navina Sundaram, Atul Dodiya, Mithu Sen, Dr. Goswami, Sadanand Menon, Tasneem, Mehta, and maybe somebody sitting. There was Nanak Ganguly, he's hiding somewhere. You can imagine what is going to happen in the question answer session, as we had some very, very pertinent questions from Sadanand and Atul Dodiya, and after that from Nanak Ganguly. We'll begin this evening with Anju Dodiya, then after that Sadanand Menon. After that they'll share a dialogue between themselves and the audience.
This idea of a question answer doesn't particularly appeal to me. I think Anju has been very eloquent, and we have seen this. But I have some curiosities about your work, and I'd like to sort of lead with that, if you may, if you permit me. One is about your color palette. How did you arrive at that particular color palette? Because if you take the history of watercolor in India, one doesn't see any reference to something like this. So where did it come from? How did you choose your colors?
I think my practice of watercolor, it didn't come from watercolor painting itself, in the sense that, as I was saying, I did 5 years of collage. So that transparent layering was what led me to my comfort with watercolor. And so because it comes from that self-learning process, I guess I was open to color because of the kind of images I had seen, the Indian miniature painting and European pre-Renaissance painting especially. So while I'm using the watercolor blue, I'm thinking of Saseta's blue, things like that. So it just overlapped.
Okay. And the other question is about your own personal anxiety, and I must say I share the same person. I mean, I too was pretty nervous before coming up on stage and having to talk. It's not just about anxiety about what one paints, it's also anxiety about what one writes or what one speaks. So, I mean, even in interpersonal discourse, it's that anxiety is more and more up. So, is it possible for you to reflect on connecting your personal anxiety with a larger social anxiety?
On the picture plane, maybe not, because I'm not referring to it. But otherwise, I realize that this is it's sort of a beast which I structure and I'm aware of, and I just use that awareness to structure it, and it could be anybody's. It's also I observe. It's very urban, the anxiety. It doesn't have to do with. It's not like a pastoral romantic idea of anxiety. It's sharp and it hits you, and it could be yours, it could be mine. Yeah.
Probably it's for an art historian to look at your work and make historical markers as to what changed during which historical period, something like that. But have you yourself felt compelled to speak through your works in a particular way during periods of social turmoil, like say the riots in Bombay or the Gujarat event, or any one of those kind of things? Have you ever felt compelled to bring any of those things into your work?
No, I haven't felt compelled to. In the
compelled
sense.
meaning
yeah.
some urge.
Yeah, no, but I think sometimes there are these, I would say,
issues of femininity, sexuality.
Or an awareness, of what's going on. Say, for instance. But also, let me tell you that when I start in the 90s, it's the same time when I started showing. It's the same time when my peers, my friends, are working with mixed media work and kind of breaking through. Like Rumana does her her performance with the body, or say Pushpa is moving to photography from her sculptures and things like that. So I also saw it as it was almost subversive to stick with watercolor, and I was conscious. It's not that one is blindly using a medium. You know that this is going to be an awful challenge. It's going to be a headache, and it's going to be it's presumed that it's a traditional medium, but one tries to I would say work against the need of the moment also.
Right, right. And another question, this is the last question linked to your work. You said many things about yourself and your work, but I think, even from earlier occasion, but even more so seeing it today from this close, I'm quite convinced that there is a huge comic spirit in you. And I think much of the underlying elements in the work and in your quests come from a wellspring of that very resurgent, very refreshing comic spirit, which is able to tide over the so-called anxiety that you put a marker on yourself. But I think it's a comic that comes through.
Yeah, I think allowing the absurd.
Allowing the absurd, yeah. So where does that come from?
Oh, where does it come from? I think partly I said that self-mocking thing, it's allowed. And yeah, so it gives you a sense of distance. So in that sense, it's almost philosophy. But I think, I hope I have a sense of humor. So
more than a sense of, it's actually a very savage sense of humor. Yeah.
And about your earlier question, actually, I know what you're hinting at, whether the political situation reflects on the work. So in that sense, never directly. But for instance, the last work, the altar for erasures, where I set up the erasures, I was conscious of, for instance, somebody came in and there was a real violent erasure going on there. Okay. I could sense his fury.
Where was this happening?
It was that Gallery Kemold in Bombay. So, the way his body language, the way he puts his feet on all the furniture, on the candle stands and just goes for it. So seeing that, it kind of hits you that, you think of Hussein, you think of the Bamiyan. And so in my case, it's conscious, I'm allowing it, permitting it. But what happens when, it's other situation? So I guess the work opens itself to the viewer to think about it, but I'm not going to sit and paint those ideas for him. It's not about, being open-faced, and one is allowed the currents. And
so what do you do with the urge to move out of the watercolor? Have you felt that urge now, or
yeah,
explore other media, other ways of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing with it sometimes, but
because I find your work tremendously photographic. There's a framing that is so much a part of photography. It's not a frame that excludes. It's got a way of including many things, including what in photographic discourse today you call the punctum, where there's some element there, the eyes goes there. The narrative is saying something else, but your eyes drawn to that little element, which I quite think you put deliberately so.
I think maybe it comes from cinema and looking at the film still really, possibly. And so I am, I can burdened by my limitations, but at the same time, sometimes I observe that the limitation is the content. So I hope that I can push it further.
Very beautifully said. Limitation is the content. Okay.
And talking about what you said, actually there were lots of points of identification. For instance, you talk about the quality of writing, the art press. It's become, it's terrible. I call it personally the synopsis culture. So, you're doing an exhibition, you slogged on a body for a year or 2 years, and somebody calls you on the telephone and wants you to say it all, in 100 words, 200 words. And
a bite.
Yeah, they don't want to see the work. And also the whole, I feel the physicality of art object, it's gone, it's like nobody wants to see it or touch it or feel it. It's about, okay, give me the concept. And I find that the artist has also succumbed, because you find artists making art which are all about concept and, okay, but what's happening? What about the surface, the material? It's all gone wrong, So, I mean, and also I was wrongly quoted earlier that I find that all contemporary art is something. But that's not true, for instance, if I love the work of, say, Rebecca Horn or Marina Abramovich, who are artists from the West and who do different kind of work, I understand, I connect. But then if I have problems with some other sort of art here, it is about real things, and we are not talking about them, we are just, it's about, okay, give me the concept. I mean, like you were saying, and that opinion.
Yeah, but do you have any ideas on how this could be altered or changed? Or, I mean, let's talk as if we are talking in a mythology.
No.
Because it's not going to happen very soon in the media, you know that. But supposing an utopian stage comes when this is possible, how do you think, what could be the process by which one can nudge this process along?
There's no shortcut. So,
Yeah. Now, can there be something from the side of artists? For example, in the 19th century, much of the game began when Cézanne started writing about art, isn't it? He's the one who constructed some of the earlier frames of reference and so on, which helped the writers later on. So, is it possible that the artist community could respond to this and produce their own writings? And it's a terrible burden to put on artists. One should not be doing it, but one can almost take it as a challenge. That one should be writing one's own text, kind of thing.
Yeah, to articulate, I suppose.
And for example, the act that you did today, I mean, if you just make a transcript of it, I think it's a fantastic articulation around your own work. Why do you need a proxy writer?
But also there's another problem that in spite of saying what you were saying, like you said, okay, then supposing the journalist or the writer, he doesn't work with his own opinion, but he works with my text. But the second thing is that the areas of I know this and you don't impress me. So the scale, or they say, for instance, that the quick entertainment, which the Times of India say if it's doing or demanding. So it happens in art too. So, the Times of India would rather have Shah Rukh Khan than, say, Subodh Gupta on the
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's fabulous that, new, efforts are begin. Bhavna sitting here, Take on Art, and magazines like that, Art India. They are niche magazines, but the fact that more and more of these can come and can be encouraged, and I can imagine Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi coming up with a serious journal. In fact, you've been doing a fantastic job with your annual art catalogs, but it can also branch out into a serious journal, which provides a platform for serious writing from this part of the country. Yeah, okay. They're not available on trees, but you'll have to train them. What I'm trying to say is, like I said, I can pinpoint the year when this decline began. It was 1995. Even in the year 2000, if somebody had asked me to start another arts page, I would still have had people around who would be writing and writing well. But today, if I have to start a page like that, or do something for a journal like that, you really have to start from scratch, because that writing does not exist anymore. That talent is gone. Nobody's been, pressurized to deliver along those lines in the last 18 years. So the best thing is to bring together a team of very young people who have no previous, opinions and baggage and that sort of thing, and start the journey. Instead of waiting for this iconic editor who will come from somewhere, maybe it's much better to start off and then get people. There are enough senior people around who can be like consulting editors or whatever and help the process along. I mean, began something like that, no? I'm very impressed with the quality of writing and all. Yeah, it's open to the floor. Anyone wants to? Because nothing happened.
The Mayans never talked about destruction.
Yeah.
They talked of a new era.
Okay.
The Hindu calendar says Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is finished. The Mayans are talking of a new age.
Oh, very good. Good for us. Yeah.
They have never talked of destruction. It is only Hollywood and Western media which has interpreted it very, very differently.
Yeah. Do you have a question for Anju or me?
No, I just want...
Just that,
so,
okay.
You were talking of utopia.
Okay.
So utopia is here.
Okay, wonderful. So good times ahead. Thanks.
My question is to Anju. Anju, as Sadanand had mentioned before, that there is a story which an artist has to excavate from the work of art, which an artist might have a story to tell, but there is another one hidden that he has to take out. how much do you agree with it as an artist, that you are trying to say something, then, but
Yeah.
somebody's trying to take out something more from there?
No, absolutely, because I mean, I might say one or two things, but one works on many levels, and it's very complex really. And in fact, I would say that sometimes the story I tell is a lie, actually it's about something else altogether. And that happens all the time, and that's why one continues making work, you can't know A, B, C and paint A, B, C, you know A, B, and then you paint A, B, C, D, E, F, G, something like, I mean, I hope you got it.
And just to add to that, there's also something called layers. So it depends on what lens you're wearing at the moment. If you're wearing, let's say, a gender lens, then you can read Anju's work from a gender perspective. If you're wearing a psychoanalyst lens, then you can read it from that perspective, and so on. So there are many lenses through which you can read. I mean, one of the very clear things that comes out when you watch all the works in such rapid succession is the sphere of domestic violence and terror, personal terror. So, what lens will you wear to excavate that? You would probably be a sociologist.
Or say the imagination, it's all
absolutely.
maybe just hums
exactly,
and
it's a
hums.
fantasy probably.
Yeah.
So, these require, those tasks will be performed by different people, not necessarily one person. But if it can be done on a larger scale, like for example, if there's a platform where 4 or 5 such readings can be done, let's not even call them excavations, but just readings of the meta text, then what a rich contribution it can make to one's understanding of life around us.
Also, as an artist, you're open to everything, you see, so I'm allowing all kinds of influences or images to enter my head. And so what you see finally is like, it's a mix, it's coming from different areas. I may not want to define everything or talk about it, but...
I'm Pushpinda Syal, I'm from the university here. My question actually links a little bit to the previous one. And I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned the notion of subjectivity. Now, subjectivity, I thought the purpose of art was actually to affirm subjectivity and not to deny it. And the purpose of the art critic would also be perhaps to encourage subjectivity. Say, for instance, if somebody doesn't like the picture of shade or orange color or whatever, the work of art, the subjectivity would involve a questioning and asking of why that is so, and why this, what is it triggering in the mind of the person who's reading it. And it would be, I mean, if I remember Paulo Freire right, he talks about radical subjectivity. And a subjectivity which is, as opposed to, a dull or a dormant subjectivity. So your thoughts on that. And my second question is, do you think there are cultural practices in reading? So that, for instance, if there may be a tendency in a particular culture for analysis, whereas in another culture there would be, tendencies towards extrapolation or connections of different kinds. And are these practices with us today in India? And if so, have they been acknowledged or are they being acknowledged? And these are my 2 questions to you.
Yeah, you want me to say?
Yes, it's for you.
Yeah, then thank you. Very, very good, very pertinent questions. I think the first one you answered yourself. The moment you say radical subjectivity, as the Freirean concept goes, is in fact questioning your subjectivity. Radical subjectivity is not accepting certain identities given to you, certain realities given to you. I can demonstrate that through a little game we can play. Like, for example, how many of you have come here into this auditorium today without brushing your teeth? Be honest. Huh? Look at that. Everybody has brushed their teeth. Now, supposing I say, I succeed that with a sentence, but lions don't brush their teeth. All of you have brushed your teeth, but lions don't brush their teeth. So we set up an opposition between nature and culture immediately. Nature as being free and culture as being man-made, etc. But see the consequences. And now the game begins. How many of you are part of the Colgate-Palmolive family? Raise your hands. Almost all. How many are part of the Pepsodent family? Or probably 90% in this room is part of these two families. Yeah, the rest may belong to Vikko, Vajradanti and whatever, stuff like the Dabur and all that. Maybe some even go for Neem Dantun, perhaps. But the fact that 90% belong to these two families leads to certain extrapolations. Both Colgate and Pepsodent today are $100 billion plus companies. And besides, I'll come to that, and besides producing froth in your mouth, they are also the greatest arms producers in the world. So your cultural practice of brushing teeth, in fact, is creating some other consequence somewhere else. Yeah. Now, radical subjectivity will demand then that let's have a dental route to revolution. Meaning, supposing that 200 people in this room stop brushing with Pepsodent and Colgate, some change can happen. Now, that would be radical subjectivity, where I decide. I don't let the brand decide. I don't let the advertisement decide. And the advertisement will say, some will say have white teeth, some will say have a germ-free mouth, some will say have no odor in the mouth, some will say look young. Various things will be said to you. But supposing I decide I will not go with this, I don't buy this. I will exercise my radical subjectivity to decide what I do with my teeth, including not brushing. Then there is a possibility for rethinking your society. But until then, you are a victim. You are in fact part of a invisible set of events which you don't even know what, because you brush your teeth with Colgate, Iraq is being bombed or some such thing. So I'm taking a very extreme example, but that's one of the answers to your question. In fact, you answered it yourself. Now, other thing is a fascinating question, the cultural ways of reading artwork. So, like I said, in a Gond village, the Gond doesn't even know he or she is an artist. They're not even reading, they're just practicing. So this reading of art comes from certain kind of urban formations we've had in the last probably 400-500 years. Because before that, it was more plastic, it was more three-dimensional. The flattening of the image has happened much later in society, almost like a post-Cartesian thing. And there the reading practices will certainly vary. I mean, it's even a newspaper, I've seen many people, they don't read from, as a newspaper person, I would invest a hell of a lot on the front page of the newspaper. But I've seen a large number of people sitting in tea stalls or in a railway compartment, they begin from the back. They read like that. So there are multiple ways of reading, which is in fact exciting. Which is in fact very exciting. In fact, I was very impressed. I've seen this before, but Navina's film yesterday on Amrita Sher-Gil, what the camera person, Nauro's contractor, did at certain moments when the screen is split, he lets the camera, instead of going this way, he lets the camera go this way and this way. And that changes your attitude to the passage of time. It's a whole questioning of duration. And one can do that with one's own eye, one can begin to read like that. So whether one reads Anju's work from this corner and goes like that, or whether you start from the middle, or whether you look for, like I said, the punctum, something where your eye goes first, etc. There are multiple ways of reading, certainly.
Anju, that was again a very moving experience of going through your work. I have a question regarding, I found it very interesting that while you were showing your work, you were referring quite recurrently or again and again, you were emphasizing on the inexpressible and how certain things we fear to express, or we don't express, or we cannot express. And it very interestingly brings to my mind this whole idea of verbal communication vis-a-vis visual communication. And in your case, especially how perhaps it's less of verbal communication and much more intensely immersing into realms of imagination, and perhaps you take it there more so perhaps, and you like to leave certain things unsaid, complicated, conflicted, whatever that term is, so that there it gets energized into those realms. And I don't know whether I'm thinking right, but I'm very interested in knowing this kind of, whether there's a connection, whether you think, where you really express in words, or read a poem, or read a novel, or read a short story, and think like that, and then there's a visual communication, or there's something. What is that relationship? There's one thing that I'm just thinking, I don't know whether I've questioned it properly.
Okay.
And the second is just a comment, because I had seen your work in Baroda in the Royal Palace where it was put, and it was very interesting because you had these shards, mirror shards in the middle, and you had put all the paintings, these huge watercolors around, and it almost felt like one may move the position of a kaleidoscope, standing static and moving it and seeing how they make formations. But in this case, the viewer has to move.
Right.
And because we cannot see the work, you have cut that axis. So we are circumambulating that piece.
Right.
And as we are moving in the mirror, we are seeing these kind of configurations happen and disappear.
Right.
And I found that very interesting, because in one way the viewer is told what to do, in the sense you can't make an entry otherwise.
Yeah, it was putting you in a performative
mode. So the viewer becomes performative, and he's that kind of, the viewer's movement is then making those images and unmaking those images, which I found very, very interesting. So for people who have not experienced it and just seeing an image, cannot really understand the way that movement and the performative act of the viewer really made the piece. The piece wasn't made otherwise.
Right.
Okay, the experience of that art happened only when the viewer performed.
Yeah, that it was important that the
circumambulation of
and
that.
also, yeah, that like I was saying, you're aching to cross the
and
gap.
even when we're not seeing one single work. So when you're looking in those broken mirrors, you're seeing 3-4 images.
Yeah,
come
you see
together
yourself, you see the image, you see the ceiling. It was, it was definitely putting the viewer in a performative mode, and yeah, I enjoyed that very much. And about, I'm not clear exactly about the question, but if one could write...
I'm very keen about the secrets of your process. I'm sure you do.
source
You don't want to give away, but I mean, you can't perhaps,
Right.
maybe, because the process is such.
Yeah, I can only tell you that when I start work, it could be, I'm not, one is not sure what exactly one wants to say. I cannot define it, but a trigger could be an image, or it could be a line of poetry, and I think the most important expressive element for me is the color, because I think with color I try to, I call it temperature, I try to give the work a certain emotional temperature, and it's very finely tuned, in the sense when I start I might think that this is going to be a red painting, but slowly the density increases, and when I say density with watercolor it means layering, with charcoal it gets muddy, so there's a very precise density that I'm looking for, very precise. I think it's about that. When you say what I want to say, I try to control the emotional temperature of the work. And after a point, I know that this is it. It has to be this cool or this hotter, and I stop.
It is temperature, but isn't it also temperament?
Yeah, I mean,
you're
when
not
I say
including
temperature,
everyday conversations, or I'm keen to know whether it could also be triggered by something like everyday conversation, or some kind of just a little happening with somebody. You're just talking to someone, and just because you refer very strongly to images, okay, and stories and fables.
Yeah, but
I'm just thinking.
I think it doesn't come from a life directly, as a life as in so and so didn't talk to me, or so and so came home. No, it's not about that. It's not about specific events. I think it is more about...
What about domestic conflict?
I wish that would make it easy. Then I would have lots to paint. But no, but I think basically it's about... I would say a kind of, it's a very poetic structure. It's built out of words or images, and actually Akbar Padamsi, he always says that art comes out of art. It never comes out of life, in a certain sense, in the, one would say in the classical sense, it's like if my mother dies, I don't make a painting. But after seeing Patharcha Panchali, I might feel about death, or I might think about it. It's, and in indirect ways, I might, when I look at Bergman, the cinema of Bergman, I might know exactly how, say for instance, I'm going to construct a red, white and black in a body and make it painful, but it doesn't come out of life in that sense. So,
Thank you.
There are so many questions to ask, you have touched so many points, the panopticon of discipline and punish, the gaze of power and everything. But I come down to the end where you mentioned that about this canonical art criticism. Is it really possible to canonize the present? Because we have always read or we studied or we've been taught by our teachers that to canonize a certain period or a certain movement, you need a space, a distance of time, at least 100 years. Like say Panofsky has said that. You have to look back at a distance. So how do you canonize the present? Say for example, when we talk about the High Renaissance, we know High Renaissance ends in 1520 with the death of Raphael. We know why. Because Bernard Berenson wrote canonical literature, canonical criticism on Renaissance. And we know, when we look back to the Elizabethan period, that who was the greatest dramaturge. So there is no doubt about that. So for canons, to create canons, we need scholarship, not mere chalbazi, which is prevalent in today's art writing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, that is a critical question, and the reason it is critical is because often, and we've seen this in our part of the world, often canons get built up because of the kind of fact that Anju is helping in her work, like erasure. In this, I mean, she's doing it deliberately, but if I don't turn my camera towards you, then you cease to exist. And if you have a body of writers on arts who are writing only about one set of practices and not about others, in a context like ours where archiving is so poor, where archives are sometimes non-existent, you have to depend upon them. It's quite incredible that an artist of Vivan's stature has to sit and work and build his own archive, an archive of Sher-Gil and Amrita and so on. I mean, but for that, where would this material have been? Like Dayanita was saying yesterday, if we had discovered Sher-Gil and Umrao Singh Sher-Gil and Nasreen Mohammadi earlier, our photographic understanding might have been different. But it's so chancy. Like I said, this cache of photographs of Kulwant Roy, completely chancy. You stumble into something. Archiving is so poor. I have probably a huge amount of photographs. I don't know where to go with it. Whom do I give it to? If I don't have a son and daughter and heir apparent kind of thing, who preserves it? So in that context, I think it becomes very important, and I'm saying this, let's say, specifically in the context of mainstream media, for sensitive arts editors to be able to send out people in all directions and get all kinds of material, and not just follow one particular path, which will 50 years later, 100 years later, build a canon. I think the canon will need to have those parallel, pathways, which sometimes feed the canon, sometimes bounce off it, sometimes are critiquing it. And without that conversation, I think that whole art historical discourse becomes so flat. And in a flattening digital system, I think it becomes almost inevitable. And this is my fear at the moment. I see Gangubai Hanagal passes away, Bhimsen Joshi passes away, Kirana Gharana has collapsed. You have CDs available, you can listen to some people here and there, but who can anymore do the teaching practices of Kirana Gharana? In front of our eyes, 1920s, Abdul Karim Khan sets it up. 80 years later, Kirana Gharana is no more. 80 years. An entire university is collapsing in front of you. what canon can you create there except nostalgia? Oh, that also existed. Now, these are the problematics of contemporary art discourse in India, where certain things are happening rapidly. Festivals are happening, fairs are happening, summits are happening, biennale is happening, this, that, and the other. But parallel critical work, parallel reflective work, parallel infrastructural work, serious problem. But for one Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, one Kerala Lalit Kala Akademi, the Lalit Kala Akademi's center to everywhere else is collapsing. Then what kind of, structures do you build up? What kind of material does one build up for the possibility of an eventual canon? So that's the simple point.
What about good old-fashioned hard work?
Yeah, by whom?
Yeah.
Hard work by whom is the question. I mean, for example, if you need your work to be preserved and you have to work simultaneously, you're painting by day and then preserving by night, I mean, I think it's too much of a call to be made on the artist. You need to have parallel systems that will create those facilities, and I mean, you should paint, then you should bring out your camera, you should photograph it, you should make the slide, you should feed it into your computer. What all will you be doing? So I think the whole process of canonization, therefore, involves all these practices, but those practices need a different kind of support. And in other parts of the world, these supports exist. People plan this, they build it into the practice. But here, there's a kind of an artist as a lonely figure, you're just going around. I mean, a scholar like Professor Goswami, where is that he's sitting with all his material? Now, unless a set of schemes are made by which his works can be compiled and put together and beautifully edited and presented, it becomes impossible for the same person to be doing all that. It also becomes narcissistic. Like if I were to ask to do that, I'll think, my God, chodo yaar. I mean, I'll do about her work. Why should I do about my own work? That seems like narcissism. So there are all sorts of issues here which I think need a different institutional approach.
In the morning I was thinking, I was looking at the miniatures in the museum, and I always regret that we have such a fantastic collection in our museums, not just here, but National Museum or Indian Museum in Calcutta, but to document, like we go abroad, and the museums are so inviting, so beautifully displayed works, and the publications, like I'm interested to look. I'm an artist, or I'm not an artist, but I'm looking it and I'm enjoying. And I was just thinking that, and I remember when Padshah Nama came to Delhi, unfortunately I missed that show, but I remember, the catalogs came from there, and within 2 days, it was sold out. Bhupen called me and he said, Atul, you must go and see, and the catalogs are over. Then they reprinted and they got again. So within India, in Delhi, these catalogs, huge big one, expensive one, were sold out. So why our own museums don't have a good quality publication book? Very simple. I'm sure it will get sold out. I mean, people will buy it, people want it, but then I don't know where it, it's then government, and they don't have money and the other issues, and I don't know all that. But it is very simple that we put funds, but it will definitely get back. So I think the museums, has a major role to play, and unfortunately we don't have that many museums.
Let me assure you, money is simply not the issue. Money is there, plenty of money is there.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, exactly. So I really feel that, in fact, I had planned today to know that today in the evening, if I meet privately Mr. Goswami, I'm going to ask that there are, I think, around 4,000 paintings.
That's what someone told me, yeah.
Someone told us, are there. And last time when I came 2 years back, it was a different set of painting. Today it was a different, amazing work.
Yeah.
And what if I want to publish this? How much it will cost? Should I ask Mappin? Should I ask some Thames and Hudson? I want to do this. That almost, that's what we were sharing. And is it possible?
It's a great idea. Propose it and do it. I think.
We'll support definitely. We'll support you.
I'm just. What I mean is, why not?
I will support
We
you.
are trying. We don't have control over the miniatures, but we have certain kind of access to the city artist artworks, which we bring out this annual art catalog. It used to be a 10-page or 20-page catalog earlier, and now it has become a 180-page catalog in which we include everything, and we try to, give our best. And if we had more access, to more works, maybe it can be done. It is, I think, it is in the coming.
Yeah.
In the coming
Like when we go abroad in the United States, in Philadelphia or in the Metropolitan, they would have an Indian art show, and in Boston they published, and we cherish here. Anyway, so
There are no questions that I have. I just want to take a couple of your minutes to say a few things. One, in acknowledgement of the fact that we have been witness to and participants in a great event. Over the last 7 days or 6 days, we spent nearly 20 hours together each evening, in all. And I cannot remember an occasion when, with such intensity and such intelligence, these things came about. Just speaking of this evening, we have an expression in Urdu, shaur jhanjodna, right?
Oh.
Shaur is what conscience is, awareness, usko jhanjodna. Needle it and question it and so on and so forth. So this event, which I owe to, the city owes to the Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, but personally to Diwan Manna, and to his very talented and dedicated team of workers. It's a kind of a gift that we have received. And I say it from the bottom of my heart.
Beautiful.
This Shaur Jhanjodna, this whole idea of embedding things in our consciences, whether by the artists or by art critics or historians, is a rare thing. When I was listening to Anju, for instance, today, with her charming sense of hesitation with which she speaks, and when Sadanand's name is to be split up into Sada Anand. Always a great pleasure to hear him. It's a luminous evening. Absolutely luminous. Luminous in terms of the images that we saw, the way she talked about them, the anxieties. She talked about the anxiety of a painter. Like herself, there is the anxiety of the writer, we hear of what is called the terror of the blank page. The sheer terror of the blank page. What do I do? A man like Balzac, for instance, would sit frozen in front of a piece of paper, not being able to know or think what he's going to do. But let me just say two things. There is I'm sure many of you know the Diwan-e-Ghalib, the great poet's collected works. The first couplet in that is one of the most mysterious, one of the most difficult to understand. People have debated this for a long, long time. What does it mean? Naqsh faryadi hai kiski shokhiye tahrir ka, aur kagzi hai pairhan har pe kare tasveer ka.
Kya baat?
Naqsh faryadi hai. What I have written or what is the image is a faryadi, is a petitioner. Right? Kiski shokhiye tahrir ka. Who has written that? We don't know. But then the second line has to be understood in terms of the cultural context in which he speaks. Kagzi hai pairhan har pe kare tasveer ka. In the medieval times in Central Asia, if a man had to go to a king with a petition, then he wore a garment of paper on which the petition was written.
I didn't know that.
On which he did not have the courage to speak to the emperor. Maybe he was not even allowed to approach the emperor.
Amazing.
But the petition was inscribed on that garment that he was wearing. Works of art. are like that. Works of art everywhere, but certainly in our land, I mean the last 35 or 40 years and so on, are in the form of petitions, which we are addressing to ourselves, to our society, and things like that. The fact remains that what we have received, the questions that the artists are asking, the questions that thinkers like Sadanand Menon are embedding in our awarenesses and so on, are important things. They can be life-changing things. I'm sure of that. I'm absolutely certain of that. I'm sorry I'm not going to be here tomorrow, and I'm taking this opportunity. I mean, Diwan has always indulged me, sometimes provoked me, sometimes twisted my arm, but mostly indulged me in giving me a few minutes of the evening. But I have benefited enormously from this. What is it that we are being made witness to by the artists of today? I mean, there are references constantly being made to a galaxy of people who are here, and I fully agree. You know, what is Iqbal said? Kabhi hayrat, kabhi masti, kabhi aahe sahargahi, hazaron rang bharta hai ye mera darde mahjuri. The artist is doing all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Kabhi hayrat, the tahayyur of it all, the wonder of it all. Kabhi masti, kabhi aahe sahargahi, kabhi sometimes, expressing a personal pain of yours and so on in the form of art. Hazaron rang bharta hai ye mera darde mahjuri. So the pity of it is, however, that these 20 hours will go, that tomorrow the 9 hours or 8 hours which have been planned and so on will pass and so on and so forth. But eventually we have to ask ourselves the question, really, who cares for art in this country? Who really cares, except a handful of people? 200 painters, artists that he was speaking of, maybe 200 critics or so-called historians of art and so on and so forth, and that's about it. I mean, where is the rest of the society? Is anybody listening? Is anybody reading? Is anybody seeing? Is anybody questioning? Is the question to my mind. One is, when Ashok spoke here, when Kalidas spoke here, when Sadanand speaks here now and so on, we are forcibly drawing the attention of our colleagues, of our compatriots and so on, to this situation. I don't think we truly care about art. The society at large thinks it is peripheral. It is here, there and so on. There's a lot of money in art, obviously, and it's nothing to be sort of sneezed at by any stretch of imagination. But truly speaking, it is events like this, and it is the gathering of people such as Diwan and his colleagues have been able to manage, which hopefully will make a difference. Enlarge the scope, expand the canvas, in a certain sense add to the constituency of those who care about art. I hope this succeeds. I hope even in a small measure, if it succeeds, a great deal would have been done. Who am I to make a comment upon what Anju said or what Sadanand said? Who am I? But I only would say, therefore, for myself, that it's been an uplifting experience for me, not something that I would so easily forget. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.